The following podcast is very scary. Listener discretion is advised. Some houses can be shells. It can keep hearts and preserve souls. We are like tiny animals caught in a trap. Ghosts born from inhabitants past, left behind like footprints in sand. It paints your life over and over, only to have it fade back to the beginning. It takes pictures of moments, absorbed through brick, preserved in an album of stone. Some born to stay, forever in its shell, alone. Welcome to the world beyond the veil. This is Geist.
My name is Heather Taylor. I am the co-host of Braaains that I do with my sister, Sarah, who's also going to be telling the story of our house.
I'm Sarah Taylor. I am Heather's sister. We actually have a family of 4 kids. So it's me, Heather, our younger siblings, Becky and Jonathan. And we all lived in the house at various stages in our lives.
We are from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. We grew up on the south side of Edmonton, and we live about a half a block away from a cemetery.
I would walk through the cemetery to get to my friends' houses on the other side of the cemetery. So it was like a common everyday walk through the cemetery, and we just loved it.
I would go definitely for walks through when I was younger, but also during the pandemic and things like that when I was with my family.
And even prior to moving into the house that we are going to talk about, we lived across the street from the house. So the cemetery was always in our neighborhood when we grew up, which is kind of fascinating.
Heather and Sarah Taylor are the hosts and creators of a podcast called Braaains. It explores the inner working of our brains, mental health, and disabilities, and how film and television portray them. They explored my brain for their Halloween episode, and during our interview, they let it slip that they had a few stories from their childhood home that certainly didn't lack character.
We lived in a 3-bedroom house, and there was 6 of us who lived in it, so that's not enough rooms. So Sarah and I actually shared the basement, and it was an unfinished basement, so just cement, and the people who were living in there before us had started to construct walls, but it was just bare wood, open construction, no drywall, nothing had been done. And so my room, in quotation marks, was under the stairs between the hot water heater and the furnace. And that's where I lived. And my mom gave me a fire extinguisher and said, good luck if anything bad happened. I think she was being funny, but also kind of it would be true. And then Sarah slept kitty corner to me. And so her bed was set up on the opposite corner of the open basement. And then we actually tacked up blankets and sheets to give ourselves rooms because otherwise we'd have no privacy. And then my little sister had a room upstairs, and my little brother had a room upstairs, and then my mom and my stepfather shared one of the master bedroom. I was at the end. I was only there for lived in that house for 1 year, but then came back to visit a lot.
We bought the house in 1996. I feel like I was right just a teenager, I think. And so when they bought it, it was about to go into foreclosure. So they got it at a super deal. And it was the house almost felt like the house had never been cleaned. My mom had to scrape grime off of the cupboards and the baseboard. I was a very high anxiety child, lots of anxiety. And I walked into the house and I was like, we can't live here. I hated it from the minute I walked in. And like retrospect, maybe there was some energy in the place that made me feel extra anxious, and that could have been it.
Also, when we moved in, it wasn't just that it was like dirty. It was, they'd smoked there since probably it was built. And so the walls were yellow and they were all wood paneled. So we pulled the wood panels down and it was just yellow walls. And we washed and washed and washed and washed them and then painted them and painted them and painted them. And it would just keep seeping through. So it created this like very, like you could never get it, like it felt like you could never get it clean.
This house had seen some trouble from its past owners.
So from what we understand, the house was built in 1960s. We are only the second family that's ever lived in this house. Patricia is the woman that we bought the house from. Her dad built the house. And then he left his family. So it was just like a mom and a few kids, I think 3 kids, that lived in the place. And then they grew up. And so Patricia and her husband, Larry, and they had 2 kids, plus her 2 adult siblings, all lived in the house. And the mother lived in the house until she passed. Larry, who was the spouse of Patricia, he went to jail and then came back from jail and brought his jailmate with him, and he also moved into the house. So then Larry ended up dying. He overdosed on the front lawn of the house. And then Larry's jailmate became Patricia's new boyfriend. And so those are the people that lived in the house when we bought the house.
The neighbors really didn't like the family there.
And the neighbors hated them. They would have these huge parties.
And there was indoor-outdoor carpet inside the house, and someone had punched a door.
One of the rooms, they just played darts into the walls.
It was a house that had, from what we had heard, had violence in it.
They were really loud, and there's always lots of fights. My mom mentioned that when we first moved in, like there was deadbolts, but on the inside of the bedroom doors, so that you could lock from the inside, and all the door jambs were cracked. So there was a lot of violence in the house.
But despite this rough past, their mother was determined to make this house a home.
When my mom came in, she tried to really just give it a new life. Our mom renovated the house, which was amazing. And we helped, but I mean, she was in there night and day. Like she ran a day home, so she would go in early in the morning and work like early mornings, and then she'd come back after work and work in the evenings. And then we'd come in, and I remember I never painted so many walls in my life. We really were in there trying to create a home. Like we'd never had a home. We'd lived in apartment buildings and, not the greatest neighborhoods. And suddenly we got to have a home.
But this house took no time revealing it was aware of their intentions.
We had the house for a few months in the summer before we actually officially moved in. The townhouse that we lived in was across the street from the house we bought. So I would walk past our new house that was in construction zone, and my best friend at the time lived down the street. We had to walk past our new house to get home. My mom had been working, mornings and evenings fixing up the house. So I walked past and I saw a work light that was hanging up on the ladder with an extension cord, and the light was on. So I thought, oh, they must still be working. So I kind of was like, oh, should I go say hi? And I don't know. For some reason I didn't. I just continued walking. And I walk in and my whole family is in our townhouse. And I was like, who's at the house? And they all look at me like, what are you talking about? Like, no, somebody is in the house working because the work light is on. And then my mom said, well, the power is not on right now, so there's no way the work light could be on. No, I don't think that. They were kind of, very much kind of blew it off. No. The light couldn't be on because the power wasn't on. I was like, no, the light was on. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe one of our uncles went in to do something. Or I was kind of giving some sort of scenario in my brain that there was somebody else doing something in there, and just continued about my day.
Once the family moved into their home, these ghostly interferences continued.
Later in the time that we were in the home, whenever we had to do construction of any kind, my mom would try to do things and it wouldn't work. She'd try to fix something electrical. She'd try to fix something in the house, and it wouldn't work.
And she'd even say, like, she would measure something and measure twice, as you do, and then go cut it and come back, and it wouldn't fit. Even though, like, she measured it like, it wasn't like she made a mistake. Like, things just wouldn't work.
And so my mom started to go, well, we know about Larry, and Larry actually was the person who did a lot of the construction of the house. So that basement with the walls that weren't walls yet was Larry's doing. And so my mom would start to ask Larry for permission to make changes to the house. And whenever she asked permission, the thing would go right.
And she does that to this day. She's still like constantly tinkering in the house and like painting and fixing and adjusting. And she'll always be like, okay, Larry, I'm gonna do this thing now. Like, just so you know.
But the experiences weren't always lighthearted.
I would be sitting at the computer and suddenly you'd feel like someone's watching you, and then everything would get cold and the lights would flicker. I totally got goosebumps, and I'd be like, okay, something's watching me. It's gotten cold. The lights are flickering. This isn't great, but I'm just going to continue carrying on. And then it would kind of like let off, but you'd have these times in the house, or you'd be watching TV and it would feel like suddenly you were being watched. You couldn't see anything there. There was no one around, but you knew you were being watched. Or just be like, I know you're there, and, try to be like chill.
But these spirits needed to be heard.
On the main floor, you had the front room as a living room with a big picture window. Then you had a kitchen in the second half. And then you had the stairs that would go to the basement. The door was wide open. The basement was dark. But I was watching TV, and there's a little bathroom, like a little pocket bathroom that's right by the back door. And when you come into the bathroom, you can look directly down the basement stairs into nothing, darkness. So I was in the bathroom, went to the bathroom, washed my hands, opened the door, and I heard someone say my name. About a third of the way down the stairs. That's where the voice came from. It's not just like in my head, it's coming from directionally ahead of me, but like in the stairs where it's dark. But I closed the door because I'm like, please, I don't want you to come upstairs. But that like terror of, I heard someone say my name, and then I had to get out of there.
It's so dark in that basement, so dark. And we didn't have a light switch at one point to turn it on from upstairs.
And it used to all be open. So it was all open into the basement. So when you walk down, it would just be, not only is it narrow and small and steep, but it's also was all open. So something could touch you, yeah.
The activity continued.
Heather and I, like Heather mentioned the description of the basement, we had our bedrooms that were walls of sheets hanging from the ceiling. And so mine was the closest to the basement stairs. So you'd have to walk down the steep basement stairs, turn like the corner, you could touch my sheet to Heather's sheeted room. Just turned my lamp off and like getting settled into my bed. And I heard the sounds of, like bare feet walking down the steps. Bare feet on cement floor. It's a very specific sound. Heard the footsteps come, past my sheeted room in the direction of like what it would sound like, because I'd heard it before, Heather walking into the basement and going to her room. And then I said, Heather? And then I didn't hear anything, and I was like, okay, whatever. And then, went to sleep. I woke up in the morning, and I went to check Heather's room, because something about it felt weird. Because, like, why wouldn't she respond? And she wasn't in her room. So I went upstairs, and I remember being like, oh, where's Heather? And then my mom said, oh, Heather stayed at so-and-so's house last night. She didn't come home. Well, somebody came home last night.
Sarah was then visited again while alone in the basement.
So we had a cat named Murphy. He was the best cat. And he ran away a lot. He had run away for the first time. He'd been missing for probably about a month at that time. And he would always sleep in my room. At this point, Heather had moved out, and I was in that corner of the basement, and we had actually drywalled, so the basement was now cut in half, and so there was a door to get into my half of the basement. So I'm sleeping, and I have the feeling of the cat jump onto the bed and like lay down beside me. And then at first I just didn't think of it because I was like used to the cat jumping onto the bed and sleeping with me. And then I remembered, wait, the cat's not here. And then as I was like, wait a minute, I heard, he's okay. The sound of somebody say, it's okay, he's okay, or like something along those lines of he's safe. And then Murphy came home.
When I talked to Sarah about it afterward, when she reflected on it, could have been the feeling of someone sitting at the end of the bed. And the voice came from where someone would be sitting. And so that's where she heard, and it was a male voice.
After spending some time in the house, theories arised of who these ghosts may have been.
So we believe that there was 2 ghosts in the house. So Larry was the basement dweller and like construction guy, or if you hung out in the basement, so did Larry. My mom said that she used to wake up sometimes and she'd have dreams about a woman, older woman, like an old woman who was in the house, and she was upstairs all the time. But my mom said she would dream of her. And sometimes I think she's seen her at the end of the bed. And then she'd wake up with scratches on her leg.
Yeah, my mom would say that she felt like, yeah, she would wake up in the middle of the night and there would be a woman as if she was like kind of hovering over her. And she said it felt like a woman, like it had female energy. And she just watched her while she was sleeping. She didn't say it was like scary to her. She just said she felt this woman watching her.
She would talk about this woman, and then Jonathan, our younger brother, was really tiny. And he'd say he'd see this lady. Like he would mention it. So it wasn't just like our mom seeing her. He also saw her too. We didn't know if he was like playing pretend or he was talking to someone, because he would talk to someone sometimes. But again, no stress about it. Just, oh, it's the lady upstairs. Yeah, I don't think she was evil at all, but we think that she was the matriarch.
The mom of Patricia, who lived in the house, and like her husband or her partner had built the house for the kids and her, and then he left. She was just there to overlook and just watching over, because she was there with her kids the whole time and her grandkids, and she was just watching over the house.
But Mom always said that she was a good presence. She always thought that it was like someone, again, watching over them. And even I think our little brother was just like, it was just this woman.
And the activity continued.
So our little sister Becky, she at this point was sleeping, like her room was on the second floor. And she had mentioned that she always felt like she was being watched at any time of the day, like day or night. She had a bunch of stuff hanging from the ceiling in her room. So like, like paper lanterns, and she'd like to make origami. And so these things were like hanging on strings in her bedroom. Was laying in bed and had the sudden feeling that somebody was watching and something really angry was in the room. So she sat up and she looked up, and all the stuff that was hanging from the ceiling was like spinning around and swaying back and forth. And so she ran out of the room and did not go back in there. Things would like randomly fall off shelves and like off the counter. She said one time she remembers Mom taking like the coffee maker in the cupboard, and so she was pulling it down, and then like it just flew out of her hands. So there was this story of a ring. My mom's ring was lost, and it was for like a few weeks, and she searched and searched.
My mom was super neat. Super neat isn't even it. So clean that you would be drinking a drink, and as you put the glass down, she would take it out of your hand and put it in the other room. But everything has its place. So things don't go, she doesn't misplace things.
And then one morning she woke up and it was in the middle of the kitchen table. And like no one had put it there.
I suggested it may have been Larry.
Yeah, he's like, found this downstairs in the basement. Get it out of here because you didn't ask your permission.
Like, I've had this happen to me too, like in the house. As always, I'd always run up the basement stairs because that's what we always did, was run up the basement stairs. And I stopped at the top, like suddenly, and I was like out loud said, "Oh my God, I smell Grandpa." And our grandpa had a very specific smell. He didn't really like to shower, so he didn't smell great. And he drank coffee, like loved coffee. So there is something, now when I smell that smell, there's like this nostalgia of like grandpa.
When Sarah mentioned this, I dug in a little deeper. Their grandfather wasn't a ghost that they would experience in the house. So I asked if there were any other experiences they had outside of the house. And that's when they began to disclose to me the other experiences of dreams and premonitions that ran throughout their family.
And we've had these experiences of smells. I was in the hospital, I had my appendix removed, and they didn't have any like room beds available in like usually I would probably be put into like a shared room. So they had me in this room where you'd put somebody who needed to be isolated. So it was a door and then a little hallway with a sink so you could like wash your hands, and then another door, and then the room that I was in. So my mom stayed with me the first night, like after my surgery, and she had slept in this uncomfortable chair and woke up to this really strong smell of perfume and was kind of like, that's strange. Like, how would that smell get into this room with all this, like, at the point of the room is to be isolated, right? And then she decided to go out into the hallway, and all the nurses were like visibly upset. This young baby who had basically spent most of her 3 years of life in the hospital had died just like moments before. And so my mom felt this like, she's like, oh, this was, somebody passing through kind of thing.
One of the oldest symbols of death is smelling flowers before someone dies. It is considered a sign that a loved one has come to collect a soul and carry them over to the spiritual realm.
Our family will sometimes have like weirdly prophetic dreams. Like I've had a prophetic dream before, but really mundane things. Definitely we have family members like will dream of people being pregnant. They'll be pregnant in the dream and then they find out they're pregnant. I was living in Calgary and working at at the Shakespeare in the Park. And I had a dream that I was just getting ready for the day. And someone came and said that one of the actors was in an accident. And then the next day, she was in an accident and she broke her leg.
Our little brother just the other day, he found his like dream journal. And so he sent a little a little writing out of it. He had a dream about something with mom, and then there's these two Japanese girls who were like staying at mom's house as an Airbnb. This is what his dream was, and this was years ago. My mom now has exchange students that live with her, and it's often two Japanese girls. Our auntie, so our mom's older sister, who is kind of like she was the glue that stuck the family together. Like everybody loved auntie. Was taken to the ER because she was really sick. And they knew she was going to pass. So we were all in the room, and my one cousin her son had to drive from quite far to get there. So finally he got there, and then she took her last breath, and like you could feel the room change, the color of the room change. Like there was lots of these really specific feelings in the space. It got warm. Like it was just beautiful and heartbreaking all at the same time. And then my other auntie who was in the room looked at her watch, and the watch had stopped at the exact moment that my auntie had passed. And it just stopped working.
And my grandmother had told us a story when she was younger. Her niece was really sick in the hospital. And she had said they'd said, you need to go home now. Like you need to go and have rest, and we'll let you know if anything happens. And she's like, if anything, if she turns for the worse, I want you to call me. No matter what time it is, I don't care. And about 3:00 in the morning, she woke up, and sitting on the end of her bed was her niece. And she knew that she died. And it was that one last moment to say, she just smiled at her and then disappeared. And then my grandmother went back to sleep. So she called in the morning and she's like, when did she die? And they're like, she died at 3 a.m.
We never collectively sat down and said, hey, let's talk about our stories from the house. It wasn't like we lived in the traumatic, scary place like you hear you see in the movies. So like this last week, I've been thinking about things, and then I like reached out to we reached out to our siblings, and I was chatting with my mom, and like all these little things come together, and like learning about who lived in the house prior to us, and that it's really interesting how like these stories kind of shaped us, and we didn't even realize all the connections that are around it. And another thing that I find really kind of tender about everything too is that I was gonna get emotional about talking about a ghost story. Come on. Okay, so our house has always been like a safe haven for people. It's like my mom ran a day home and like took care of children, and like our house was the place where people came to like have Christmas dinner. And if our friends didn't have somebody around, like I had friends who didn't celebrate Christmas, they'd still come to our house and celebrate Christmas. And our house was always full of life, and people were always in the house. So like often we weren't alone in our house because somebody was always there. And I think over the years, the 30 years that we've had this house, like we've put so much love and good energy into the home. Like I think that these stories aren't as scary because there's so much love in our house. But thinking about Larry, like he was in jail and then he came back and this was his home. So like he knew what life was without his home maybe. And then he came back to his home, and then he died on his home's front lawn and never left his home.
I have a show that I wrote that was about people when they died, it was just like going to sleep, and that was it. And that was so terrifying to me, this idea of just emptiness. I look back to science and the first law of thermodynamics being that all matter cannot be created nor destroyed. And so there was actually a physicist called Aaron Freeman who said more on that, where he's like, this idea that you're never going to die because your energy will never die, regardless. Like, that's the whole thing of the closed system we're in. That law that, we will always become something. All our energy, every vibration, every moment of everything of heat, every wave of every particle that was ever your child remains in the world. And so like, that is kind of how I think about us, and that there's pieces of us, and that we're not gone. We don't completely disappear, but we're just rearranged.
A very special thanks to Heather and Sarah for sharing their story. If you have a sec, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It helps those that cannot sleep through the night find us. Do you have a story you've been hiding? Submit it to us at hello.geist.podcast@gmail.com. Both written and recorded submissions are welcome. Geist is written and directed by Danielle Matar. Original music and FX by Beau Jensen. Geist sound and mixing is by Adam Esker. Geist logo is by Jake Carruthers. Follow us on Instagram at Geist_podcast and on TikTok at Geist Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, sleep tight.